everybody. Welcome back to Hauntflix Horrors, the place where nightmares come to life. If you love spine-chilling tales that send shivers down your spine, you've come to the right place. Make sure to subscribe and hit the like button for more terrifying stories that will keep you up at night. Are you ready to be scared? Because the darkness is waiting. Let's dive in. I just woke up in the middle of the night, remembering this, and needed to get it off my chest. When I was about 17, my mother, sisters, and I lived in an old rundown house in a remote area. It was a private rental. My sister would do work for the landlord to pay our rent. Our landlord never came off as particularly creepy, but that could be because I rarely went outside when he came over to talk to my mom, and he wouldn't dare do anything in front of her. One day, I was home alone. My mom and sisters had gone out somewhere. I don't remember exactly where. And I had my cat in a fenced yard outside, but that was it. I was in my room, probably playing a video game, and we lived far from town, with a long driveway that my bedroom window directly faced. I couldn't see or hear anyone driving up the driveway, but I suddenly saw a car that wasn't my mom's, and I immediately freaked out. I ran and shut all the blinds in the house, turned off all the lights, and checked the doors, making sure they were locked. It was our landlord. He lived next door, about 3 miles from our house. And yes, that was the closest house. This wasn't the first time he had shown up unexpectedly. It had happened twice before, and both times I was home alone. Those first 2 times, he was only there for about 10 minutes, walking around the outside of the house and then quickly leaving. But this time was different. I grabbed a large kitchen knife and hid under the kitchen table. I heard him pull up outside and open our front gate. My cat outside was going crazy and hissing, and I heard him yell, "Shut up, you pest!" And I could hear his footsteps approaching the door. He tried to open the front door, and I was freaking out at this point. I texted my mom, and she was coming straight home, but it would take her about an hour. He continued to walk around the outside of our house, trying to peek into each window. The house was old and had 2 doors that you could enter from the outside, and he tried to open both. I thought maybe he didn't know I was home. Maybe the last 2 times were just a coincidence. But then he started saying things, including calling out my name, so he knew I was home alone. I couldn't hear what else he was saying through the double brick walls. I quietly crept through the house, following his voice up and down the hallway, trying to hear what he was saying. That's when he said something that I'll never forget. "I'm going to burn this house down, but I'll let you out first." Of course, I didn't take him seriously, which scares me even more. He wanted me to come out. He wanted me to take his threat seriously, and that's the part that gets me. I know exactly what would have happened if I had believed him, and my life would have been completely different. He was there for at least half an hour, maybe closer to an hour, and he was very persistent. He left before my mom came home. I told her everything, and we moved out soon after. I still don't know how he knew I was home alone, and my mom never saw him on the way driving out. So, he knew my mom was gone because there was no car in the driveway. But how did he know I wasn't with her? And why did he act like that? Admittedly, I've been a lurker on this forum for a few years now. I've tried to type out my story numerous times, but always struggled to wade through the pieces as they've become more jumbled and foggy with time. I can't say that I was traumatized by what happened. I'm not sure if it makes me a messed up person, but I typically tell this story at parties to impress drunk acquaintances into thinking I've survived something cool. So, let's get into it. In 2017, I was 20 and working the summer at a youth camp in a city in the Midwest. I'm going to leave out the city name, but just know that, like many big cities, crime occurs frequently, and this one was no different. I had been assured that this neighborhood, however, was in the process of being revitalized. They had even just opened up a trendy coffee shop and a dog park right down the street. To give you a clear visual, this neighborhood had dilapidated houses with trash out front, right next to houses with immaculate yards and modern architecture. The youth camp where I was working was essentially just a large 2-story house with a big fenced yard. Again, we were assured that we were safe because we had bars on the windows and the outer doors locked automatically when they shut. The camp was conducted downstairs, and the summer counselors, there were 4 of us, lived in the small upstairs area that was off limits to the kids during the day. Our camp ran 5 days a week, 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. afterward. Our time was ours to explore the city, rest, or whatever. Now, one weekend night in August, we were all just hanging out in the house and making a spaghetti dinner. We each got our own stipend for food, so we divided it accordingly for meals and brought our own snacks and stuff. We were also in charge of preparing lunch and snacks for the kids on camp days, so we had 2 fridges and 2 pantries. As you can probably guess, we labeled them Camp Fridge and Pantry and Staff Fridge and Pantry. We were also super petty and wrote our names on all of our snacks in the fridge. My best friend worked at the camp with me, and we'll call her Jessie. It was our turn to cook that night, so I went into the staff fridge to grab the ground beef. I immediately noticed that my case of yogurt tubes was gone. They were my go-to snack, and I brought like 3 cases a week. I had just opened my last box an hour before to have one and left it in front of the ground beef. It sounds crazy, but I knew I did. I closed the fridge door and headed to the dining room, with Jessie closely behind me. I yelled out, "Who stole all my yogurt?" That night, in addition to Jessie and me, there were 2 other summer counselors, 2 permanent staff members who lived in the area, and the cousin of one of the permanent staff. Everyone looked at me wide-eyed, then looked around blankly. I figured it was the cousin, because I had never met her before. So I sucked it up and said, "Whatever, just if it has a name on it, please don't eat it." And then pulled Jessie back into the kitchen to finish up the spaghetti. We all ate dinner, and then the 2 permanent staff members volunteered to do the dishes because we let them eat with us. The rest of us headed back upstairs to get comfy on the couches in the sitting room and turned on * Family Guy. We were only 2 minutes in when the cousin, who we'll call Sarah, said, "Wait, I can't find my phone or wallet." I paused the show and rolled my eyes, still annoyed about the yogurt. Jessie said, "Where did you last have them?" And Sarah said she left them on the couch before we went downstairs to have dinner. Naturally, we all started looking around the small room, turning over couch cushions, looking under the couches, behind them, under blankets, really, wherever. Finally, we asked, "Are you sure you didn't leave them downstairs?" She agreed to head downstairs to look with the other two, and Jessie and I went into our room, which was connected to the sitting room. We flopped down on the bottom of our bunk bed, and I proceeded to talk crap about Sarah, who I felt was kind of ruining our chill night. Our door was open, and I was shocked when I saw a hand kind of sneak into view, like it was going to grab the door frame. I said, "Hey, did you find them?" Thinking that Sarah or the others had somehow made it back upstairs without me hearing them, and that they had overheard me talking crap for the past 5 minutes. But the hand immediately disappeared out of the door frame, and there was no response. I looked at Jessie like, what the hell was that? And she looked back at me, confused, because she hadn't seen the hand. I quickly explained what happened, and then we both jumped up and headed to the top of the stairs. We yelled down to the others, and they yelled back that they still hadn't found Sarah's stuff. By this point, I was freaked out, because who was up there with us? Of course, we were those people, though. And we started looking around upstairs, in our bedroom, the other bedroom, and the sitting room. And we found nothing and no one. We decided not to say anything yet, because I might sound insane. And also, could someone have gotten downstairs so fast without us hearing them? When we got downstairs, Sarah was super upset and crying. And her cousin said, "Come on, guys, did someone take her stuff?" Jessie and I both knew that we didn't, and we said so. Sarah screamed that obviously someone took them, and we should just be honest. Things got heated, so I finally decided to tell them about the hand, because I felt like it might reduce the tension between us. It did, but then everyone panicked. We ran around the house like maniacs, looking in every closet or hiding space that the kids used, and found nothing. Nothing and no one. We ended up calling our camp director to come over, because the situation had devolved into chaos. When he got there, we were all sitting huddled in the foyer, freaked out, and we explained what we could. He just didn't seem convinced that someone was in the house, and threatened to call the cops if one of us didn't give Sarah back her things. Well, none of us fessed up, so we called the cops, and they came over, searched the property, and took our statements. It seemed so dumb as we repeated our stories, but we didn't have much to go off of, but a feeling. They did write a report for stolen property, which made Sarah feel at least a little better. With the house secure, everyone left except the 4 of us summer counselors who lived there. We spent the night in the same room with the door barricaded, reassuring ourselves that we were being stupid and that the phone and wallet would actually turn up somewhere random. And we'd just laugh about it. Fast forward a few days. We'd relaxed a bit. We still hadn't found Sarah's things like we expected, but nothing else weird had happened, and we'd been occupied with the kids and the job in general. The kids had all gone home at this point, and it was just the 4 of us again in the house. We finished cleaning up outside, locked the gate, and headed into the dining room. We were all hungry and wanted snacks, and Jessie got to the kitchen first. She said, "Someone left the kitchen door open again." I mean, it's kind of weird, but kids go in and out of that door all day, so of all the doors to be open, this is the least weird. She shut it, and then I noticed that the staff fridge door was also cracked open. Then, who knows what possessed me? But I said, "Oh no, y'all, he's back." And we all laughed, because we thought this was ridiculous. Jessie grabbed a broom, held it like a weapon, and said, "Let's get him, girls." She started to throw open the pantry door, screaming, "Where are you at? We know you're in here. Show yourself." I was following behind her, laughing, but I started to feel uneasy and nervous. She continued her charade into the next room, throwing open 2 more closet doors, and then moved into the front room and opened that closet door. She started another confident, "We know you're..." when she stopped mid-sentence and screamed so loudly that the skin on my neck prickled. She then threw the broom into the closet and sprinted out of the front door, leaving it open. My heart was pounding so hard at this point, but I thought she was messing with us. So I turned around and went the other way into the foyer and out the front door. I saw her booking it down the street toward the coffee shop, and I was like, okay, what is she doing? As soon as I turned back around to find the others, he was just there, an older man, looking really dirty, with hardly any teeth, and just grinning at me. He had his hands up and said, "I didn't mean no harm," while slowly backing down the street in the other direction. It was so creepy, because even though he said it like that, it didn't seem like he meant it. It was like his tone and grin were mocking me. I was frozen for a second. Then I sputtered out, "You can't just leave." And he just said again with that goddamn grin, "I didn't mean no harm," and then turned and ran. I fumbled in my pocket for my phone, dialed 911, and then went to follow him. But as soon as I reached the edge of the house, he was gone. The next events are kind of a blur. It sounds wild, but we all really thought we'd just freaked ourselves out. No way in hell did we actually think someone was in the house. The cops took our statements and reminded us that we needed to keep the door shut at all times, no matter what. Our director apologized profusely for initially not believing us, and my parents wanted me to come back home for the remainder of the summer, but I was like, hey, what else could happen? Jessie had it worse, though. She was terrified to stay in that house, and she told me later that when she opened the door, he was just grinning at her with these sort of dead eyes, like he was waiting for her to finally find him. She said that she'd never forget his face. Now, we're still best friends, but I can't bring up that summer to her if she hasn't been drinking. That's basically it. I think what kept me up at night after that were just the unanswered questions. How long had he been in the house? Why did he randomly decide to take the phone and wallet of the one person who didn't work there? Had he listened to our private conversations? Watched us get dressed and showered? How much food had he stolen that we didn't notice? And where had he gone when we were looking for him on spaghetti night? What hiding places did we miss? Was he under my bed at night, or at any point during my stay? I don't know all these answers, and I know I'll never have them, but I guess I'm just thankful our interaction wasn't worse. My earliest memory of a nightmare turned out to be a real event. The title might sound like something from a horror story, and that's exactly what I thought when I first discovered the truth about 2 months ago. Since then, I've been busy dealing with the aftermath of a family tragedy, but now that things are settling into a new normal, I figured it's a good time to share this. I apologize in advance for any formatting issues. First, let me describe the nightmare. It's a very short dream, but it's burned into my memory because of how terrifying it was. I was about 4 or 5 years old, maybe 6 at the most. My twin brother and I shared a bunk bed in a room at the far end of the house where we grew up. In the nightmare, I was lying in bed, looking out the window, and saw a red sky, the kind that appears in the early dawn hours before sunrise, when the light starts coloring the sky. The only other thing I remember from this nightmare is a man with wild blue eyes and a bald head suddenly appearing at the window, staring right at me. That's where the nightmare ended, but I remember how much it terrified me. I screamed and screamed. I don't remember where my brother was when I woke up screaming, but I do remember my mom coming to get me and calming me down as she took me to her bedroom down the hall. I recall this event so vividly because I wondered where my dad was at the time. Now, fast forward to the present. My father was recently in a hospital in Argentina, where he lived. My twin brother, older sister, and I were staying in a hotel about a 5-minute walk from the hospital, where he was in the ICU. One night, after a long day of being there for Dad and the extended family, my siblings and I returned to the hotel. We sat together, had a couple of beers, and tried to relax after everything. We started talking, just trying to unwind. And somehow, the topic of nightmares and dreams came up. I brought up the story of my childhood nightmare, and without missing a beat, my sister explained that it really happened. She remembers the whole thing. My sister, who was 5 years older than my brother and I, which would have made her about 9 or 10 years old at the time, had a bedroom adjacent to the room my brother and I shared. Her room faced the front lawn and street, while our room faced the neighbor's house and driveway, with a very low fence between the two houses. While she didn't go into too much detail about the days leading up to this nightmare, she said that she had been followed by a bald man in a truck as she rode her bike home with some friends a couple of times before that day. The day before the nightmare was no different, but this time, the man actually drove right past our house. At the time, my sister was a latchkey kid, since my brother and I had to attend a special school about 45 minutes away from our hometown due to a speech impediment that many twins have. And my mom had to pick us up rather than be home for my sister after school. However, she was never home alone for more than an hour. That afternoon and evening were pretty normal, as she remembers it. My dad came home from his job. He worked part-time as a cop and at a local hardware store, and we all had dinner, did homework, played, and did the usual family things before bed. That night, at around 12 o'clock or 1 a.m., this bald man parked down the street at a small industrial park, walked up to our house, and tried to get in through my sister's window, which woke her up. She screamed when she saw the man nearly opening the window since it wasn't locked. My dad stormed in and tried to either shove the guy out or hit him with his nightstick. My sister doesn't remember exactly which, but the man ran off. However, he only stayed away for a short time before returning to try to get in through the window in my room. He tried opening the window, but it was locked because my mom didn't want my brother and me to open it since our bed was right up against it. My sister said I screamed as loud as I could, and my mom came in to get my brother and me, while my dad ran out the front door to chase the guy, but to no avail, as the man fled through our backyard. Our backyard was situated against a small rail yard, part of the aforementioned industrial park. Between our small neighborhood and that rail yard was a dense patch of trees that always made the backyards very dark, so my dad didn't want to risk being attacked there, and instead went back inside, called the police, and then called our elderly neighbor to make sure they were okay while our mom took care of us kids. This is all my sister could remember from that night herself, as this happened a very long time ago. Neither of us can recall anything else after that, and the story sort of just stops there. Unfortunately, my father passed away in the hospital, so we can't ask him about it. Given everything that's happened, none of us had thought to ask our mom yet, but maybe I'll ask her soon. One evening, I was in Redding, California, to pick up a handgun I had recently purchased for protection. Despite the confirmation online and via email that it was ready for pickup, the store didn't have it in stock yet and told me to come back in another week. I lived about an hour from Redding at the time, and by the time I got there, the evening rush hour had just started to get unbearable. I didn't want to drive all the way back home right away, since it would add an extra hour to my already long commute. As a side note, the car I was driving belonged to my dad, and I was borrowing it until I could save up enough money for a new one after my beloved Toyota broke down the previous year. To kill some time, I wandered around the store where I had bought my firearm, then decided to drive over to the nearest coffee shop. It was a newly built cabin-style cafe with a modern twist. The barista handed me my 16-ounce dirty chai, and I walked back out to my car. Next, I drove to a gas station around the corner, still trying to kill time until traffic thinned out. The car didn't need gas, so I pulled into a parking spot right at the corner of a four-way intersection where the gas station was located. I turned off the engine, stepped outside, and lit a cigarette, leaning against the driver's side door to avoid stinking up the interior. The weather was overcast and drizzly, but not too cold. It was dusk, and most of the daylight had faded. The stoplights at the intersection were diffused by the late autumn mist, and I watched them flicker from green to yellow to red and back again as the traffic moved in sync with their signals. Zoned out by the lights and lost in thought while enjoying my coffee and smoke, I didn't notice the man walking toward me until he was already halfway across the street. He was a white guy of average height with strawberry blonde hair, perhaps in his mid-20s. He definitely hadn't changed his clothes in a while and carried a backpack that I assumed held the few belongings he had. He didn't smell, but he looked ragged and unkempt. My immediate thought was that drugs were likely part of his lifestyle. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but I'm always cautious, having grown up in the suburbs of San Francisco. The man finished crossing the street and awkwardly limped toward my car, maintaining eye contact with a strained grin. I locked my car out of caution, but remained outside, smoking casually. Normally, I'm a social person, but I don't go out of my way to be unpleasant either. He approached me and stood about 10 feet away when he said hello and asked if I had a light. I hesitated, but saw no harm in fulfilling this very simple request. Taking 2 steps forward, I lit the cigarette he held out toward me. As he approached, he attempted to make small talk, weaving in hints that he had just gotten off the bus and still needed to go another block down the road. Somewhere in his poorly crafted sob story, he stopped mid-sentence, like a bad actor, and pretended to be struck by an epiphany. "Hey, would you mind just dropping me off down the road? It's not very far," he asked. I apologized and said I couldn't help because it was my dad's car, not mine. and I didn't feel comfortable driving it without his permission. A stupid but plausible excuse that I came up with on the spot. The man didn't like my answer, and his smile immediately turned tense and flatlined. Clearly upset, he became more insistent, saying, "But it's just down the road," and adding, "My leg is killing me. It wouldn't even be far for you. I'll give you a cigarette." His persistence and sudden burst of hostility made my hair stand on end, and I firmly said, "No, I'm sorry, I can't help you. It's my dad's car, and he's got set rules." With 10 years of hospitality experience under my belt, I immediately offered him alternative ideas for how he could get to where he needed to be. I even suggested that maybe someone inside the gas station could help him out or call him a ride. Each word I said made him increasingly irate, and he began curling his fingers into fists, not in a threatening way, but like a toddler about to scream bloody murder for not getting their way. He seemed to pause and size me up for a very fleeting moment. I'm small and not at all intimidating physically, so I told him that I hoped he made it home safe, quickly unlocked my car, jumped in, and locked myself inside. When I looked up from locking the car door, I saw him speed walking back across the street, heading in the direction he had originally come from. No limp, no awkward walk, no distress or pain, just the normal speed walk of a physically well person. A very rage-filled person. I knew I had dodged a bullet there, and I felt pretty dumb for hanging around the city after dark alone. At that point, I didn't care about the traffic anymore, so I started the engine and hightailed it home in what ended up being an hour and 45-minute drive. But this time, the traffic was 100% worth the inconvenience. PSA: if you haven't heard it enough already, be careful who you give your attention to, especially when you're alone. Stay aware at all times and err on the side of caution, even when strangers seem harmless.